President Glenn. Please join me in welcoming Kevin Sunday. Kevin manages energy and infrastructure policy for the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the largest broad-based business advocacy association here in the Commonwealth. He has helped secure passage of recent key environmental legislation at the state level and helped shape the development and implementation of various energy and environmental regulations. In addition, Kevin has testified on these issues before Congress and the Pennsylvania legislature. Prior to joining the Chamber, Kevin led media relations and communications for the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection and has held a senior role with a communications firm. Kevin is now the chairman of the board of directors for the American Red Cross, taking over for me. Thank you, Kevin. In central Pennsylvania, and is magna cum laude graduate from Towson University. He lives in Mechanicsburg with his wife Heather and their 2 sons. Please join me in welcoming my friend Kevin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the warm introduction, the hospitality. As mentioned, I live in Mechanicsburg. I grew up in York County, so I know for a lot of you, you're saying, what's this guy from another country doing here? So appreciate you rolling out the red carpet for me. Yeah, amen. God is good. One of the reasons I love working at the Chamber is this is a beautiful state. I mean, I've traveled around, I've watched the sun come up over Maine, watched the sunset over Santa Monica. Those places are nice to visit, but we got a lot of good stuff going on here in Pennsylvania, and it's our mission at the Chamber to get the word out and keep jobs here, expand opportunity, and really make this state more of what we know it can be. So, who is the Chamber? We've been around a little bit, since 1916. We have about 10,000 member companies across the state, and we aim to be a statewide voice of business. We were put together back 100 plus years ago when local chambers said, we got to keep an eye on you, Harrisburg. You know, it's not enough we just check in with legislators when you take the horse back home. We want to make sure that someone's in Harrisburg. As you consider bills and regulations, you hear what's going on for folks back in town. So we do a couple things. We're day-to-day in the Capitol working with state agencies on policy, the governor's office. We hold conferences throughout the year for folks to come, network, learn about challenges on HR, IT, building security, environmental regulations. And we do some benefits consulting, mostly for small and medium-sized businesses that need some help on their insurance, their HR, et cetera. So, Sean asked me to come here. You know, I appreciate the opportunity to do it because there's a lot going on policy, and one of the biggest strengths and opportunities we have as a state is investing in our infrastructure. There's a lot going on there on that front, so I wanted to make that the focus of my points today. This is a map. It's not a recent map. It's a map of 1796, and I know you're all looking. Is Lancaster up there, right? Yeah, that, by the way, is one of the reasons I love this state, right? My brother lives in Kansas, and if I asked, you know, someone from Kansas, where are you from? They say, I'm from Kansas. If you meet someone from Texas, say, where are you from? I'm from Texas. I mean, you know, some of you guys travel, you sit next to them on the plane, where are you from? You don't say Lancaster. You say, I'm from Elizabethtown or Donegal Township. And then you have to go east or west, right? Can I trust this person? So, no, maps are helpful, right? They tell you where you can go, but first you got to figure out where you are. And what mattered 200 plus years ago, as you see in this map, there's a couple roads, but really stands out, the squiggly lines are the rivers. That was really the main avenues of commerce. It's where a lot of your big cities were developed: Philadelphia, Boston, Charleston. Those are your main points of trade, because if you couldn't get your product to market on a couple of days with a horse or team of oxen, it was going to rot. It was much faster to get it on a barge. It was one of those challenges with sharing the waterways led to, we'll get to the Constitutional Convention and why they were in Philadelphia. It's been a driving point of economic development in Pennsylvania. It's 200 plus years. Agriculture, obviously, Lancaster, the most fertile, productive county for ag in the country. We're a major producer of electricity. In fact, nobody sends more power out to the grid than Pennsylvania. We produce about 30% more than we need as a state. So if you've seen headlines recently about Texas, California, the Midwest, blackout risks, we're not seeing that here. We are seeing high prices. That's something, you know, we want to address. We've also seen our water help us lead the way on innovations in pharmaceuticals and vaccines, manufacturing, any business is going to need water regardless of what they do. Some folks need a lot more water than others, but we all need it. We have more than we know to do it. Now it's a challenge when it comes to building things, as I'll get to in a little bit. But it's also a challenge, we know our history, we won the Revolutionary War, the states kind of broke off, they didn't want a central government. And one of the challenges was Washington and some other moneyed interests from Maryland and Virginia, they wanted to charter a corporation to go into the headwaters of the Potomac and see, because again, water is your main point of commerce, there's a way through the mountains that would open up the Ohio territory. Can we go out there and find a way through and navigate and expand on trade? And one of the things that they were hung up on is how do you charter an interstate corporation? Who owns the fishing rights on a river that touches two or more states? And they were really, banging their head against the wall. So they started meeting in Annapolis for a couple of years trying to figure it out. There's a lot of other issues going on with public finance that in the early 1780s, they descend on Philadelphia and figure out they gotta come up with a new constitution. Because interstate issues, how we manage our water, that was top of mind. In addition to all the good civic stuff we hear about, the right to free speech, freedom of liberty, Second Amendment, your Bill of Rights. There was very much a real bread and butter kitchen table issue going on with how do we advance commerce in the United States. And you really saw a couple things happen there. You saw business leaders from across the country come in and they wanted to represent their state's interests, right? So you had the small landholders in the Northeast, you had Pennsylvania, abolition states. That's one of the first things we did as a state once we separated from Britain. We were the first state to pass an emancipation law. We were one of the first states when we were a colony, the General Assembly, which predates Pennsylvania as a formal state. In the early 1710s, actually passed a tariff ban on the importation of slaves, and the Crown, British Parliament said, no, you're not doing that, you're still going to trade slaves. So one of the first things we did once we separated was we said, we're going to end that practice. So I think that's something to be proud of for our history. I know there's a lot of discussion about where our founders went wrong, what they got wrong. I think some of that's fair, some of it's not, but I think there's a lot to be proud of in our history. There's a lot of discussion about agriculture, again, trade, but one of the things that you saw in Philadelphia is Alexander Hamilton came in with a view towards kind of looking around the curve. He was one of those innovators that could kind of see around the corner a little bit. He knew that at the time, America was pretty agricultural, but what was going to come was manufacturing. What he also knew is the success of the country was going to depend on his ability to make sure there's a system of government that got the business leaders to buy in through bonds and public investment. And that was what became then the Federalist system, or became the Whigs and the Republican system of government. Big picture, we're going to tariff imports of finished goods, and we're going to use those tax revenues to do internal improvements, to dig canals, to expand ports, to do roads across the interior, and benefit everybody. So from the very beginning, infrastructure has been a core duty of government in a way that we advance prosperity in this state. And so when the Constitution got finished being compromised and discussed, it wasn't Moses coming down with stone tablets telling everybody, here's how it's going to be. They had to go state by state and get the voters to buy in on their vision. And one of the ways that they did it through the Federalist Papers. These were a series of essays in newspapers and magazines across the country. They made the case of why the Constitution was an improvement over this Confederacy concept. And one of the very first arguments he made in the second essay, the papers, was John Jay of New York. He said, if you look at our waters, they're a great gift. They tie us together. I know we're all our own states, but these are something we all share. They help us trade with each other. They help us communicate with each other. One of the things my folks that like small government, they point out that Congress used to be part-time. Well, it was part-time in part because it took months to get to DC. So you have an election, it took a couple months to figure out who won. I know that probably sounds familiar. And then it would take them sometimes 3, 4, 5 months to get to DC. Sometimes they just wouldn't show up. So there wasn't a lot that you couldn't have 2-year legislative sessions in Congress because it just took everyone. And then you'd have to go back and tell everybody what you did, and then they'd either vote you out or send you back. But water, he said, that these succession of navigable waters forms a kind of chain around our borders as if to bind us together. You're saying, transportation and exchange of commodities, these rivers are a reason why we need a little bit more of a stronger federal government. So as I mentioned, that Constitution was a product of compromise about different visions and different interests, but it's the longest existing Constitution in democratic world today. And when we look at how we're doing today, I think it's fair to say, we have a very active political operation at the Chamber, and folks are frustrated. We look at polling, and a lot of wrong direction numbers out there. This is one of my favorite polls to point to, Georgetown University. They go into battleground states like Pennsylvania, and they ask folks questions like, how's it, what's your view of the environment out there? And almost 90% of people say we need to see more compromise and common ground. Of course, then the next question they go ask, are you tired of politicians who don't fight for ideals and stand with the other side? And 87% say yes, right? So how do you square these two? Well, the cynical answer would be to say, common ground is where I'm standing from, I want the other side to come towards me. So recently they started changing how they ask. They said to voters, all right, tell us which of those two things you really want. Do you want a leader that gets things done even if they compromise on their values? Or do you want somebody who always fights even if you don't get a solution? And 2 to 1 folks say, I want something to compromise and find solutions. Now, I think the caveat to that would be what percentage of those 27% that don't want to give up are primary voters? And the way the system is, we will reward probably the outside of both parties right now. But we think the only way we're going to move forward and advance opportunity in Pennsylvania is if we get buy-in from both parties. So what are our needs in the state? As I mentioned, a lot of water, but a lot of water is going through pipes that need replaced. A lot of it's going to the Chesapeake Bay, which, as we know, needs to see its health improved. We have the 5th most road miles of any state, and the most of any state under Pennsylvania control. So what it means is, we got a lot of highways and bridges to take care of. That's directly our responsibility, not the federal government's. And that's expensive, particularly in a state where we have harsh winters and hot summers and a lot of truck traffic going on. So 7,500 miles of those roads are in poor condition, 3,500 bridges are as well. Broadband access, we saw this with the pandemic. We really need to make sure people have affordable access to high-speed internet. So last year we supported in DC passage of a bipartisan infrastructure bill, and it's going to deliver billions in highway funding to the state, expand broadband coverage, a lot of investment on drinking water infrastructure, really getting lead out of public schools as a focus. Airports is big, alternative vehicles, and then probably 2 of the biggest legacy environmental issues out there beyond water quality, oil and gas plugging. We drilled the first oil well in the United States in 1859. And there's a lot of wells up there that they vent, they leak, they're not safe and they need plugged, but the companies that drilled them are long gone. And we have a history of coal mining that, the stewardship practices aren't what they are today. And there's literally just giant heaps of coal that wasn't quite good enough for the technology at the time to burn. As rain falls on them, it acidifies the water, it goes into the stream. So if you've gone up to north central, northeast PA, sometimes you'll see a stream that's literally orange or green. So we'll have more money coming from the federal government than we've ever seen to clean some of that up. Busy under the state dome as well. The recently enacted state budget, some infrastructure pieces I note there. Governor Wolf's administration wanted to toll 9 interstate bridges across the state, the closest one being 83 back and forth outside of Harrisburg. Legislature worked to compromise to drop that, saving motorists $2 billion a year. At the same time, we know we have the highest gas tax in the state. A lot of that goes to fund state police. State constitution says motor fuels taxes are only supposed to support highways and safety thereof. Over time, a lot of that's gone to state police as local townships for reasons due to cost, personnel, population loss. They've disbanded their police departments and relied on the state police. So the legislature's been working on a way to find the state police more funding and get the gas tax revenue to stay for roads and bridges. So they freed up $175 million more for highway funding by slowing down that diversion. And that's going to free up enough money to, when this federal government money comes down, there's a local match. So that gives us the money there to make sure we get our share. Also made sure that public transit's going to get funded, more money for broadband, as I mentioned, and then water cleanup. So a lot of this money's coming in, that's good, right? What are the challenges? Well, the challenge all of our businesses have been facing for a long time, red tape. It takes a long time to get through procurement, permitting, construction, inspection. When we advocate for infrastructure funding, which a lot of voters say that's something I'd like to see government do, the opposition will say, come on, our infrastructure, maybe there's some potholes, it's not that bad, it's not actually crumbling. Well, there was a fairly well-traveled bridge outside of Pittsburgh earlier this year that collapsed. And they're working very quickly to rehab it. And we're glad to see that repair happen, we're glad we have the money to do it. But I was really struck this week when I saw an update from PennDOT on it that said, well, we're moving quickly, but under normal conditions, this would have taken us 3 years to replace this bridge. And I thought, as we've asked the question through the pandemic, when we see regulations get waived and things move faster, why should it take an emergency to speed things up? If this is what we're actually capable of, then we shouldn't accept 3 years as business as usual to replace a broken bridge. Time to market in general, it just takes a long time. So we got to improve that in the state. We do pretty good. That far right picture is the Philadelphia port. I'm sure a lot of you have seen pictures over the summer of the ships circling outside the LA ports, Oakland ports. Philadelphia port's actually the most efficient domestic port. A lot of that is because it was really designed not to do finished goods like computers and TVs and consumer goods that comes in to California. They do a lot of food in and out. So we know Pennsylvania's a big agriculture state. There's a lot of meat and vegetables coming in and out of it. So they're timed to know you can leave a TV on a truck for a couple of weeks and it's not gonna melt. You can't leave crates of tomatoes and strawberries and T-bone steaks, right? So we think that's an asset, particularly as businesses are saying, I don't think I really want to do business in China anymore. Maybe I want to move my manufacturing to Brazil or Africa or Europe, right? So as we see investment come out of China and into more cross-Atlantic traffic, that's going to be good for Philadelphia. But there's some improvements that could be done there. The other challenge is, workforce, energy costs I mentioned, supply chain. We saw inflation numbers today. Inflation's the worst it's been in 40 years. That's basically there's too much demand for too few supply. We gotta make it easier to build things in this country again, make more electricity, more gasoline, more oil, more power, more food, the growing demand for it. And then the workforce. So unemployment numbers came out last week for the state. We're about a percentage point behind the national average. So that alone, would be reason to say we gotta do more to increase opportunity for the state. Buried in that release was an update on the actual number of working Pennsylvanians. And that's an important number too, because it's one thing to say unemployment measures what percentage of people that want to work are working or not working. The labor force number tells you in aggregate how many people are actually working. And if we go back to pre-pandemic July 2019, there were 6.5 million working Pennsylvanians. Today it's just over 6.1 million. So in 3 years, 400,000 people. That'd be like if this whole county just, vanished. They're out of the labor force. Now some are tired. Some said with remote work, I'm going to Charleston, going to Nashville where my kids are. Some unfortunately passed away, and a lot working mid-career mothers said between education, challenges, childcare, I can't do it. I'm stepping out. We've seen that in our company. A few moms stepped out of the workforce. So we have our challenge. We lost. I'll jump ahead a slide. Big political season discussion this year was redistricting. Pennsylvania lost a congressional seat. It's because our population went down. They went to states with better economic climates than ours. So a lot of the discussion for political junkies was when they do these new maps, who's going to get put together, who's going to go head to head, and it's all that kind of fun stuff. But it misses the fact that we lost out because our economy's not doing well. Too many young people are headed out of Pennsylvania. I got to tell you, I graduated Dallastown in 2004. And at the time, it seemed like the general discussion was apply to Millersville, Penn State's my reach, apply to Pitt, Penn's my reach. Occasionally you had someone go to Maryland because they liked the basketball team, but they stayed in Pennsylvania. I'm amazed now when I talk to people a little bit older than me, or my cousins are a little bit older and their kids are looking at school. It's Tennessee, Chattanooga, University of Charleston, Florida, South Florida. They want to go south, some of it's football, but it's really amazing where folks want to go. And then when they get out of school, my daughter works in Nashville, my son works in Charlotte, I'm going to fly down and visit my son in Tallahassee this weekend, or Denver. We really got to reverse that. So up here, the orange states, they're the states that lost population over the last 10 years, and the blue states gained it. And generally, those blue states have better opportunity, lower cost of living, cheaper place to start and raise a family. So we got some work to do to catch up to ourselves. Every state up there that gained a seat, there's now more people working those seats today than pre-pandemic. So over the pandemic and coming out of it, we lost ground. We're encouraged in Harrisburg that folks on both sides of the aisle realize we got to make major steps to improve our competitiveness and make it easier to build things in this state and start a business. So as part of the budget, we saw really monumental changes to the state's tax code to make it more welcoming to start and grow a business in the state, both for large businesses and small. We also saw pretty significant investment in the educational improvement tax credit. And if you run a business, you're probably familiar with this. What this basically says is if you give to a local educational nonprofit that's supporting the schools or supporting pre-K, that comes off your tax bill to the state. It's really impactful because your local businesses are going to know the needs of the community probably better than Harrisburg is. They're doing the sausage making on the education funding. We also saw a child care tax credit get enacted at the state level for the first time to help some of those child care issues that I mentioned. We've seen now, and for Governor, I mentioned both Republican and Democrat say the tax reform is important. We need to keep that going forward. We definitely agree, and are pleased to hear that that's on both sides of the aisle. So just a couple rankings that I want to mention. This is from CNBC. I think this is a pretty fair assessment of where we are. 17, that's a little higher than I actually would have guessed. They say, here's what you're doing well. Pennsylvania education, we know we got great schools, whether it's Franklin and Marshall, Penn State, Penn College, Thaddeus Stevens, Pitt, tremendous amount going up there. Tech and innovation, Pittsburgh's really reinvented itself. We see out there autonomous vehicles, robotics, a lot of tech investment going out there. Access to capital, there's major financial firms around that can help. And then quality infrastructure, pretty good. But where we could do better, again, workforce, cost of living, overall economic growth, overall fiscal finances. We have some work to do. And the good and bad news is it's going to take all of us. So community leaders, here's the good news. When we talk to voters, we're trying to figure out how do we get this message out about turning Pennsylvania around. We ask them, who do they trust? Nationally, Edelman's trust, this is a PR research firm. They generally ask folks, businesses, nonprofits, the media, government, who do you trust? Who do you think can solve problems? They put business at the top the last couple of years. They don't have much trust in government or media right now to tell them the truth or to solve problems. They're really looking at the private sector. I think some of that's the pandemic, where a lot of businesses were struggling, trying to figure out how to stay open and really change things. There's a lot of, it's a burden, it's a duty, I think, that we have to respond to. Most folks trust their employer. Not only do they trust their employer, they want to hear from them about policy. When we have our focus groups with voters, it's really, there's so much government, right? It's complex, there's different layers to it. They want to know, but it's hard to get your head around these big national discussions. What does it actually mean at kitchen table? They want to hear from you if you run a business, not necessarily like who to vote for, but when policies are up, what does this mean on taxes or investment, healthcare? End of the day, what is this going to mean for the health of the business? What issues out there matter to the future of your industry? They really want to hear from you. And they trust you. They trust the most trusted source of public policy is a local chamber and a local business leader, more than anybody else. So, I see it in day-to-day around the primary, the fall. I've never had a political conversation with my doctor. I don't really bring it up. I seen him yesterday. He goes, what is with these ads? Who are these people? Do you know anything about them? They don't trust the advertisements, right? They want to know what's going on. So we have new district maps. We have new legislative districts this year. And your voice is really going to matter. Your neighbors are going to say, you're in a new district. Well, you know about this person. That candidate hopefully knocks on your door, and then you can have a conversation with them. Folks want to see business leaders stand up, tell them what's going on, and push for direction. I'll end with this. We've heard the adage that it's really hard to turn a cruise ship around. For engineers in the room, you might know it's actually impossible. You can't put enough force on a rudder of a a cruise ship going at speed, there's too much pressure from the water, it's gonna snap. So how do they figure out how you ever turn it? They put, it's called a trim tab. It's a little rudder on a big rudder. And you can get enough force on that to turn, right? You turn the big rudder and the ship turns. I'm trying to say to you, for my friends in the room, you're that little rudder, right? Your voice matters a whole lot more right now, and we need everyone to work together. Help us at the chamber, help our local chamber at E-Town get better policies put in place in the state and federal government. It's a time of change. We're really at an inflection point, and it's an exciting opportunity for me. I know, as mentioned, I live in Mechanicsburg with my wife and 2 kids. My sister lives in Virginia. My brother, twin, he lives in Kansas, right? I got the opportunity at the chamber to stay home, stay near family. A lot of folks are leaving, right? I want that to return, right? I want more families to say, my son had a great opportunity to stay in Pennsylvania. My daughter started her business here instead of Nashville, and that's our vision. But we've got a lot of work to do, and look forward to hopefully you're all supporting our vision. So thank you. Happy to take any questions you might have.
I'd like to cycle back to your conversation or your point about gas tax and the percentage of that goes to state police versus the percentage that goes to local municipalities. And that's something that's near and dear to me, trying to manage the liquid fuels reimbursement that West Donegal receives every year and watching it begin to dwindle. And realizing that that's a difficulty that we're going to have to face. How in touch are you with what's going on in the legislature with regards to electric vehicles and trying to more equitably deal with them with regards to road usage and taxation?
Right. Yeah. So what John is referring to there is you fill up the pump, you put gasoline or diesel in your truck or car, and technically you're not paying it. They moved it to the wholesale, but you're paying it. It gets passed out, right? That's about 53 cents a gallon. Electric vehicles, right? They're not putting gas, so what's the tax? There's a fairly nominal annual additional registration fee, but if you break it down, it's not close to what a typical driver makes. So, the legislature wants to, there are efforts and conversations, folks on both sides of the aisle do want to increase that annual fee. The argument you always get from environmental folks or, folks who want to see alternative transportation is, well, we want to get these things on the road and let's not disincentivize them. We think it needs to be equitable. There's going to be more electric vehicles on the road. It's not going to be overnight, but the next 10, 20 years, you're going to see an erosion in gas tax revenue. You've got to figure out replacement. The other challenge with electric vehicles, batteries, there's about, I would say 10%, if you just take the weight of a battery versus the weight of the gasoline tank, you get about 5 to 10 times more power out of the gasoline than the electric. What that means is the batteries are way more expensive than your gas tank. And when you see big trucks like tractor trailers, you put a battery in there, really, really heavy. That's going to wear it down the roads. So that's something we have to think about too. It's kind of underappreciated in terms of road maintenance. We know the wear and tear, the growing logistics sector with all, it's a boon for Pennsylvania. It's a growing economic sector, but they're putting wear and tear on the roads. So that gets more of a challenge with the heavier battery weights, something we have to think about too. Yes, sir.
First, thank you for all you do on behalf of businesses, because it's necessary, and even going through the pandemic, there was your involvement in some of the ridiculous stuff that came out of that was very helpful. I do have a question. Have you worked at all with the local tax structure? Like when I'm in the tax industry, and when I look at how Maryland does it, it seems so efficient. They collect it through their state return. They don't have a different tax department in every locality with different rates, overhead, waste. So is that something that the chamber has tried to change? And I know nobody wants to give up anything.
Right. Yeah, hats off to John. There's so much government in Pennsylvania. Local governments have their own association lobby. So I work at the chamber, but there's association of boroughs, first-class townships, second-class townships, cities, and a municipal league, right? So sometimes we say, let's streamline the rules of the road here, and then my friends in the local government groups go, what about this, what about that? So it's a challenge. I think about 20 years ago, there was some efforts at doing some consolidation that helped make the multi-township. There's probably more that can be done there. And I know my colleague handles more of the tax issues. That's an issue that comes up a lot, particularly when we have businesses with bigger facilities across multiple townships. It's a challenge on payment and collections, for sure. Yes, sir.
Pennsylvania's property tax system consistently ranks at the bottom. What is the chamber doing about that?
Right. Yeah, it's one of those issues that doesn't cut, it cuts across party lines, because you could have a Republican from one part of the county and their local property taxes aren't that bad, and they go 2 municipalities over and they get hit really hard. They're trying to work out funding formulas that alleviates a lot of the burden at the local government. Our concern is some of the proposals that are out there. If you just raise taxes on everybody, solve an issue for I don't want to say a couple, because it's a bigger cost. We don't want everybody to pay more. I think this probably gets back to the consolidation issue. It might make more sense than this be a major project to get to a county level education to be more equitable. I think what everybody's waiting on is there's a pending Commonwealth Court case whether or not the state system of funding is equitable. And you could see the courts decide, because this has happened in other states, that there needs to be a lot more investment in public education. And depending on how that goes, that could push the need for, could push property taxes back down if more ends up coming from the state.
Does the chamber have a voice in like local or even national government with like PLAs and with the injection of all this infrastructure money? Will it ever get opened up to private sector companies, or is going traditionally it's going to go to all union labor,
Right.
Bridge construction, all the other things that go along with that?
Yeah, we've opposed efforts to tag public construction projects on prevailing wage. We think they unnecessarily add cost. I know the Biden administration wants more of those projects to go through union shops, and we think it should be open to everybody. So that's something we fight now. Money gets to state governments, program by program. We have to stay on top of it. But yeah,
It's a huge problem because it's just the dwindling workforce.
Right.
You brought that point up earlier. So the only way to supplement it is with private sector.
So, I'll preface my comment on, I love my country, but I hate my government. You ready?
What Glenn meant
All
to
right,
say was.
So, you, in your role, you must just be pulling your hair out every day because nothing can ever change in government. You can't solve a problem, period. It just goes for years and years and years. In the business sector, we solve problems every single day and make changes and move forward. Government never does. How do you rationalize all that? And how do you even make sense of it? It's just so outrageous. It's crazy.
well, I agree with you, and this is why I think when we ask people who you trust, they say small business owners, they know because you're wearing a lot of hats. You're your own finance and HR and purchasing manager. You don't have whole departments for that stuff. They know you're trying to figure it out. It's a challenge, right? You know, it's really hard to advance something. I guess if it's the brighter side of the coin, I'm not sure. You know, really hard to get bad stuff done unless it's coming out of an agency, and that's another discussion. The regulation, the bill passes once, the regulations get updated every 2 or 3 years or annually. It's give and take, and you're right, pulls your hair out, but occasionally you get the big win like we did with taxes this year. We want to build on that. We got 203 members of the State House, 50 in the State Senate, and 222 of them voted for it. So we think there's a growing understanding that we can't keep doing what we're doing. We need a little bit more compromise. We need a little bit more votes like that to happen. And so that's what we want to build on. We're optimistic, but it's going to take people that want to see solutions, right? We see a lot of folks, I alluded to earlier about the, do you want compromise or do you want fight? That 27% I want fight, they're overrepresented, right? In the primary system, day to day, there's not a protest in front of the Capitol that says, what do we want, prudent change, when do we want it, in the interest of time, right? Like, The allowance wheels get the grease, so what we're trying to do is get folks that want solutions done, find them a platform to amplify what we're doing day to day in the Capitol and say, you know, we're paying attention a little bit more, we wanna see solutions. It's gonna take a while to get going, right? Flywheel, Rotary, right? Yes, sir.
Are all chambers of commerce autonomous or independent of each other in state of Pennsylvania, or any other state?
Yep, that's a good question. So, we were set up by local chambers, but we have our own board. So we're our own 501c6 with our own board and reporting structure. Local chambers, they're their own entities. The U.S. Chambers, its own entity. We collaborate, so we have local chambers on our board. My president and CEO is on the U.S. Chamber board, but we work together, but we don't work for each other.
I'd like to speak to Glenn's issue for a little bit. Because I agree with him 100%. And I've been involved in local government for 15 years. The frustrating thing is that we are governed as townships by the second-class township code, which basically says what we can and cannot do. And lays out what I think are in many cases, very cumbersome ways of doing what we know we need to do. PSATs, which is the statewide organization for townships, every year passes I think it's close to 100 resolutions to our lobbying wing saying, go to the legislature, get these things changed. And, well, it's an uphill battle.
Sure.
But I completely identify and sympathize with what Glenn is saying. As local government, it would be nice to be able to be nimble on the ground and deal with things. Unfortunately, the way it's set up at the moment makes it very difficult. It's still your best. The government closest to the people is still the best, but there's guide rails that are hard to get out of.
Right. No, it's a challenge, right? And I would love to tell you that every policy fight that we've lost have just been straight up on losing a debate. Sometimes it's personality, right? Mm-hmm. So we have the House and the Senate, right? So you get the bill passed in the House, you need 102 votes, at least 26 in the Senate, and then get the governor to agree. Do you ever try to set up dinner with 8 people, right? now just multiply that. Sometimes it's just like personality, right? Yeah. Well, the House didn't move my bill, so I'm not moving their bill on dog vaccination rules. And you're just like, but is it a bad idea or not, right? Yeah. It's a frustration.
It's middle school.
Yeah. Sometimes there's, right, I'm at legislative hearings and getting grilled by a really progressive member, and I just sit there thinking like, you have nothing on my 3-year-old, right? So it's a challenge, but what matters most is when we're having these policy fights, right? Local voices step up, and they know that if you're taking the time to call in the middle of the day, that it's really going to matter. And it doesn't take much to get sitting elected officials, particularly in state government, nervous if they get 7 or 8 phone calls on an issue. We know what we're talking about, but they know it really matters if I show up and say, this bill matters a lot, and then 10 folks from E-Town follow up, and Senator Allman, Senator Martin know this one really matters. So.
I think one of the other, you had said about time is a concern. I'm a township supervisor as well, not in John's Township. Lucky for him, or I'd be his boss. But even the 283 off-ramp down here at Cloverleaf Road, PennDOT had pretty much said, yeah, that looks like a good idea. Well, till everything gets moving and final, PennDOT, the personnel change. Oh, we don't like that anymore. So you start over, and here, there goes like 6 or 7 years down the tube, and you have to start over. Now it's done deal because they didn't like the $1.5 million upgrade. They want a $15 million upgrade. So it's that time. It's like playing against each other. It's like smacking your head into the wall. You get one you know, something agreed, and then it changes, and you have to start back over. So I couldn't do what you do at that level, it's hard enough at this level.
No, I appreciate it. Keep pushing the ball forward as much as you can. You gotta work it out for us. All right,
Hey, thanks a lot.
thank you.